Hotaru is a lazy genius who wants to be alone. However, after he's forced to join a club with the popular girl in class and accidentally rizzes her up, she falls hard and does anything to please him. On the first day of school, Hotaru ignores everyone and heads straight to class for some peace and quiet. However, a nerd named Satoshi shows up to drain the little social battery he has left. He insists that joining a club will be the best way for Hotaru to finally get a life. But then Hotaru pulls out an acceptance letter for the Classics Club. He then explains that his sister, who was once a member, convinced him to join so they won't shut the club down. After classes that day, Hotaru collects the key for his new clubroom and uses it to unlock the door before he sees Iru, the baddest chick on campus. After getting his stomach butterflies to chill out, he finally asks why she is in the clubroom. So she tells him she's joining for a personal reason. Upon realizing that his plan to enjoy painful solitude has been ruined, he decides to leave and tells her to lock the door. But she stops him and points out he's the one who has the key. This surprises him since the door was locked when he got there, so he asks how she got inside. Iru says it was open when she arrived and begs him to help her figure out how the door got locked. Suddenly, he notices that Satoshi has been secretly watching them this entire time. Satoshi then apologizes for snooping and says he never expected to see Hotaru all alone with a chick. Hotaru then tries to leave again, but Iru stops him and insists they figure out the mystery of the locked door. As she grabs his hand and gets close to his face, the look in her eyes causes him to experience emotions he never even knew existed, so he reluctantly agrees. After they take turns coming up with theories about how she got locked in, Iru tells them about a weird sound she has been hearing. So they all patiently listen and finally hear it coming from a different clubroom below. Moments later, they watch as the janitor locks up another clubroom with his master key, and Hotaru explains that he probably locked her inside while making his rounds. After solving the mystery, he gets confused by the fact that she didn't notice, so she takes them back upstairs to show them the old building that kept her distracted. With the pointless investigation finally over, they decide to head home, but then Satoshi decides to join the club as well, so they can keep solving mysteries together. After classes the next day, Satoshi tries to tell Hotaru about a scary school legend so they can solve the mystery behind it, but Hotaru ignores him to work on his assignment. However, when Satoshi tells him that he initially heard about the legend from Iru, he suddenly gets intrigued and asks Satoshi if he knows any other legends. Minutes later, Iru shows up and tries to tell Hotaru about the scary legend, but he quickly interrupts her and suggests that they listen to Satoshi talk about his new legend instead. Satoshi then explains how no one has been able to find a mysterious club called the Silk Spider Society that occasionally attacks the student council. After he says that they probably put up a secret flyer to attract new members, Iru hits Hotaru with the same curious stare from yesterday, but this time, he easily agrees to help them find the flyer. Moments later, they find the main billboard for club advertisements, so Iru and Satoshi start looking for clues. All of a sudden, Hotaru finds the secret flyer hidden in plain sight and says the Silk Spider Society probably left it there because no one would ever think to search for it under all the colorful flyers. Despite feeling a little less excited than yesterday, Iru decides to accept it as another solved mystery, so they all head home. However, while walking together, Satoshi commends Hotaru on coming up with a fake mystery in a matter of minutes just so he wouldn't have to deal with the real legend Iru wanted to talk about. Hotaru then claims he only did it to avoid any extra work, but after they both solve the first mystery in seconds, Satoshi asks if he really wanted to avoid extra work or if he just didn't have the balls to say no to Iru like he does to everyone else. Over a month later, he goes up to the clubroom to continue his nonchalant Sigma act, hoping Iru will suddenly become obsessed with him. But as always, she barely notices and focuses on making their club a little more interesting. After a bit of brainstorming, she suggests making an anthology for the upcoming festival, but Hotaru refuses because he can't handle any more social activity. To fix this, she once again turns up the charm, and he easily folds like a worthless simp. So she takes him to the library to start researching on an anthology topic. However, he gets surprised to see a friend named Mayaka who already knows he would never take himself to the library, even if his life depended on it. Satoshi, who was already inside, then claims that Mayaka wants to get freaky with Hotaru, but she immediately denies wanting any part of his shrimp and claims she would never fall for an antisocial creep like him. After Eru eventually explains her plan for the anthology, she asks Mayaka for issues done by former members of the club, but Mayaka explains that it is locked in the archives, so they have to wait for the head librarian. Using that opportunity, Satoshi asks Mayaka about a mystery she brought up earlier, and Hotaru immediately tries to make a run for it. But Eru quickly becomes interested, leaving him no choice but to join another pointless investigation. Minutes later, Mayaka starts talking about a book that has been returned every Friday for the past 5 weeks and claims it's weird because the library policy allows books to be held for 2 weeks at a time. Just then, Hotaru acts like he doesn't care just so Eru can convince him with her perfect face, but Mayaka interrupts their foreplay to solve the mystery. After she explains that it has been borrowed and returned by 5 different girls around the same time. Hotaru compares the time and realizes that it's too short to do any actual reading, which means they are definitely using it for something else. They then spend a couple of minutes trying to think of an answer and end up back at the front desk comparing with other books. The next moment, Eru notices the smell of paint thinner on the book, and after wondering if she is part dog, Hotaru takes them to the art club, where a bunch of girls have drawn portraits with the same book. After they both commend him on finally making himself useful, they head back to the library to tell Satoshi. Hotaru then tries to leave, but Eru calls him back because they still have to figure out the anthology topic. Finally, the librarian, Yoko, shows up, so they ask her for the past issues. But she says there are none left in the archives and leaves, seeing as they have nothing else to do. Hotaru leaves to enjoy his weekend in peaceful solitude, but Eru calls him on Sunday to ask for a meetup. Later on, he waits at a coffee place until she shows up out of breath and apologizes for being late. After she orders something, he asks why she wanted to see him, but she tries to change the topic. So he gets up to leave because even a face like hers can't get in between his perfect weekend plans. She then apologizes, so he sits to listen to what she claims is a confession she has been struggling to admit. Every part of him wants her to finally blurt out that she is in love with him. But instead of going full romance drama, she asks for his help remembering something very personal. Her uncle went missing in India 7 years ago and is now basically on the official list of people who probably kicked the bucket. But long before that, back when she was still rocking crayons, she once heard he was in the classics club and asked him a question about it. He refused to answer at first, but she kept pestering him like a mosquito until he caved in and gave her an answer so depressing that she bawled her eyes uncontrollably. And the dude just stood there watching her melt down without even patting her on the head. She admits she desperately wants to remember what that answer was and why he acted so cold afterwards. But Hotaru struggles to understand why it suddenly matters. She explains that it is the main reason she even joined the Classics Club in the first place. And with a funeral service coming up since missing people usually get marked as dead after 7 years, she wants to recall those words to feel closer to him. Hotaru, being the professional slacker he is, claims it is none of his business and refuses to help. But his usual act of not caring isn't working on her this time. When he asks why she picked him over her other friends, she admits she already considers him a knockoff Sherlock Holmes, and she hypes him up about how his recent brain upgrades can finally help her find closure. His ego gets stroked just enough, so he gives in and promises to help, throwing in that he'll even fix her amnesia while at it. The next week is midterms, so club activities go into hibernation. But on the very last day, he gets home to find a new letter from his sister. After talking about life abroad, she asks whether he has done an anthology yet, and mentions a safe in the clubroom that holds all the past issues. The following day, he hands the letter to Mayaka and Eru, but since they have never seen a safe in the current clubroom, he reminds them that his sister graduated 2 years ago, and the clubroom has moved since then. Luckily, he had already done his usual lazy detective work and asked around, so he knew where the old one was, but of course, he sat back until Eru used her beauty to drag him along. On the way there, he notices some makeshift sensors like the kind you'd see in a paranoid raccoon's den. And when the girls find the old clubroom locked, they hear someone inside. Moments later, a guy named Masashi comes out, and the air instantly turns into a suffocation chamber full of Axe spray. As soon as he sees Iru, he gets twitchy and asks what they are doing at his club. The girls then tell him about the safe, but he claims there has never been one. So Mayaka pulls Hotaru aside and points out how fishy his behavior is. The next moment, they remind Masashi that the clubroom is technically open for anyone to check according to school rules, so he lets them in. Hotaru then spots a fan suspiciously placed right in front of a piece Masashi claims he is working on, even though the wide open window is doing just fine, but he ignores it and helps search. When they come up empty, he asks Masashi if he moved anything large when he joined the club, but Masashi only remembers tossing some boxes. Hotaru then casually mentions calling in a supervisor to do a deeper search, but Masashi immediately goes feral and tells them to leave. Before walking out, Hotaru explains exactly how the anthologies should look and tells him they will be at the library for a bit, just in case he magically happens to stumble on them. A short while later, the find anthologies are stacked neatly in their clubroom like a miracle delivery, and Mayaka immediately asks how he pulled it off. After making her promise to keep it a secret, he reminds her of the sensors and how Masashi had probably set them up to cover his addiction to the za with gallons of body spray. Being a senior means expulsion and family shame are real possibilities, which explains why he freaked out when Hotaru mentioned supervisors, since the safe has been under a fake table the whole time and is probably his stash spot. Just as Mayaka finishes roasting him, Satoshi comes in dressed like a sunflower rights activist and gets really excited by the news. At that moment, Iru pulls Hotaru aside and shows him the second anthology, saying it is the one tied to her uncle because it has something written about him inside. That issue, written a year after he left, makes him out to be some kind of hero, even though he clearly isn't, which leaves her still looking upset. Hotaru then suggests reading the first issue since it is from when he was still a student, but Mayaka points out that the very first issue is nowhere to be found. On the way back home that night, Hotaru tells her to think about letting the others know so they can pitch in, but she shoots that idea down until he reminds her that both their brains are running on low battery and won't be quick enough to figure it out alone. At the club the next day, she finally tells Satoshi and Mayaka everything, and they all agree to meet up at her place over the weekend after digging into their own research. Saturday comes, and Satoshi wastes no time flexing his rainbow-coated fruity energy, while Hotaru tries to pretend he doesn't even know him. But the embarrassment is already locked in, so they just bike across town until they reach the massive estate that belongs to Iru's family. A moment later, she welcomes them into her palace-sized home and makes sure they notice every fancy corner before leading them to the meeting room, where Mayaka is already sitting like she owns the place. Once everyone gets comfy, Iru hands out copies of the preface from the second anthology, since that is the only part with a clue about her uncle. It says he was expelled from their school 45 years ago, after a fight that apparently turned him into a legend the very next year when the second anthology was written. She then explains that it happened around the annual school festival and guesses that her uncle probably fought off some wannabe gangsters who were robbing stands at the event, which is how he both became famous and got expelled. Both Satoshi and Hotaru reject her theory, though, saying there weren't really cases of violence like that in the late 90s when he was in school. Minutes later, Mayaka drags them out to the porch to enjoy its over-the-top scenic view, and after passing around some papers, she explains that a riot broke out the same year Iru's uncle got expelled. It was basically a student protest against a new school policy that affected everyone. Mayaka believes her uncle led that protest and probably threw hands with some teachers, which is why he got kicked out. But Hotaru corrects her and points out that the protest happened months before his expulsion, so her theory is also wrong. Next up is Satoshi, but his stomach takes over and forces them all back inside, while Iru makes rice balls to keep everyone alive. After she serves them, Satoshi comes through with old school newspapers from the year her uncle was still around, and according to those, the protest was actually peaceful, meaning there was never a clash with teachers that can explain the expulsion. They then lay out all their findings and expect Hotaru to do his big brain magic. But he is already tired of the whole thing and acts clueless, so they will stop throwing theories at him. Right then, it starts raining, and Iru remembers something she left outside, which gives Hotaru the perfect excuse to go drain his bladder. While walking through her luxury maze of a house, he accidentally stumbles into her room, where she has scattered more notes about the mystery. When he finally finds the bathroom, he decides to pull his best Sherlock impression and piece together all the facts in his head. Soon after, everyone regroups at the table, and he explains that the expulsion isn't random at all. From all the info they have, there was clearly a protest led by Iru's uncle about the new school rules, and it is connected to the festival. With him leading the charge, the school eventually gave in and allowed the festival to go on for the full 5 days the students wanted. However, to avoid another rebellion, the school waited a few months and then quietly expelled him after the festival, so no one would cause a scene. With the case wrapped up, Iru thanks them all for their help and sends them back to the hood. On the way out of her massive estate, Satoshi starts pestering Hotaru about how he is clearly down bad for Iru, but Hotaru keeps denying it like a pro liar, claiming that he is only sacrificing his peaceful life as a proud introvert just to show what a kind human being he is. After getting home that night, he spends hours wrestling with his own feelings before deciding to dodge the fight by calling his sister to distract himself. Their conversation starts nicely and continues going smoothly until he mentions the little investigation into Iru's uncle, Sekatani, and she casually drops the bomb that the whole incident is actually a tragedy. Before he can ask for the full scoop, she hangs up and leaves him staring at the ceiling, stressing about how his so-called genius theory is basically incomplete trash. The next day, he drags the rest of the gang into the clubroom for an emergency meeting and gives them a few minutes to roast him for thinking his dusty brain can rival Sherlock Holmes. After they get that out of their system, he tells them about the mysterious phone call and waves around the preface from the second anthology like it's the Holy Grail. The new mission is to figure out if Sekatani willingly took the L for his friends by getting expelled, or if he was simply used as a convenient scapegoat. Satoshi suggests the only way forward is to hunt down whoever had written the preface, but Hotaru smugly says he is already a few steps ahead and that it is none other than Yauko, the current head librarian. In no time, they all march over to the library, with Mayaka handling the shelf restocking like a responsible citizen, while Hotaru, Iru, and Satoshi corner Yauko with their questions about the preface and their half-baked theories. After admitting she had written it and realizing that Sekatani is Iru's uncle, she leads them into her office like a boss fight cutscene and even gives Hotaru props for figuring out most of the story. To give them the full truth, she takes them back in time to that year, when school festivals were basically the highlight of student life. The school randomly decided to shrink the festival from 5 days to just 2, and that was enough to make the entire student body rise in protest. The only problem was that while everyone wanted to complain, nobody had the guts to lead because punishments were scarier than finals. That was how Sekatani ended up being thrown under the bus and picked as the fake leader by some mysterious student nobody really remembers. Things went downhill fast when the protest escalated and the old martial arts building ended up getting burned down, which gave school authorities the perfect excuse to demand a scapegoat instead of letting the whole mess go public. The unlucky winner was Sekatani, who got expelled right after the festival, so the school could keep the peace and save face. With that, Yauko finally solves the mystery, but they still wonder if Sekatani willingly stepped up as a noble sacrifice, or if he was just abandoned by his so-called friends. Hotaru decides the answer is hiding in plain sight in the anthology covers and Sekatani's strange choice to name it Hyuka. A quick translation reveals that Hyuka, which normally means ice cream, is a depressing pun Sekatani used to disguise his pain, basically spelling out that he has been sacrificed by his peers, who were too spineless to take responsibility. The moment Hotaru explains it, Iru's amnesia gets body slammed, and she remembers that her uncle has indeed told her he had been sacrificed by his classmates. The memory hits her hard, so she tries to keep the tears in check as she thanks Hotaru for finally helping her piece everything together. But he brushes it off like it is just another day of being the discount alpha detective he secretly pretends to be. A couple of days later, Hotaru is in class, staring blankly at the board and wondering why the teacher always sounds like he is speaking some weird alien language, while everyone else suddenly starts hearing what seems like Iru getting into an argument with her teacher in the next room. Later in the clubroom that day, she walks in and finds Mayaka mid-meltdown, already close to rupturing Satoshi's eardrums with the way she is screaming. So she steps in to calm her down, but Mayaka only gets louder until Hotaru casually threatens to cut her tongue out. Just like that, Mayaka sits back down like she has been instantly tamed, and the whole group starts wasting time talking about the effects of getting angry since they have no better purpose in life. They mostly focus on how Iru always seems to have her emotions under control no matter what, while Satoshi playfully suggests that Mayaka should probably enroll in anger management classes before her outbursts turn into a full-blown medical case. Hotaru eventually gets sick of listening to the whole pointless discussion, and finally asks Iru about the argument she had earlier with the teacher, but the sudden spark of curiosity in her eyes makes him regret even opening his mouth. He tries to walk out before things get messy, but she catches his bag and says it is important. So he stays, fully aware that his lack of self-respect is keeping him trapped once again. With their broken Sherlock Holmes now officially trapped, Iru explains that the teacher walked in like always to teach math, but instead of following the usual lesson, he suddenly gave them a problem they hadn't been taught before. He then picked random students for the answer, and got visibly annoyed when none of them could solve it. That was until Iru stood up to argue her case, and kept going back and forth, until he realized he had actually skipped ahead in the curriculum. Both Iru and Satoshi immediately point out that the teacher is usually way too organized and careful to make such a rookie mistake, so they ask Hotaru to figure out the real reason behind it. He lazily suggests that maybe the teacher just missed a day, but even Mayaka calls him out and says he is obviously just trying to avoid working his useless brain cells. While the conversation goes on, Satoshi admits that he still can't understand the math problem, even though his class has already covered it. And that small statement gives Hotaru an idea. He grabs a bunch of snacks shaped like letters and explains that each teacher has their own notes carefully arranged for their different classes, with Satoshi being in Class A and Iru being in Class D. He realizes the teacher must have gotten the notes mixed up because he writes his letters in lowercase, which makes A and D easy to confuse. Once again, Iru leans in close to thank him with a kiss, and while Hotaru tries to keep his usual Sigma act going on the outside, inside, he is secretly hoping Satoshi and Mayaka will disappear so he can drag Iru straight to Pound Town. Unfortunately for him, the two toxic lovebirds stay completely oblivious and won't stop interrupting. So he gives up on the idea and ends up walking home with them instead. Days later, Hotaru finds himself trapped on a bus with Satoshi and the girls, heading straight into a countryside village famous for its hot springs, all because Iru decided the only way to properly thank them for solving her uncle's expulsion drama was with a group trip. By the time they roll up, Hotaru's stomach is already doing move-star flips, so Mayaka saves the day by dragging them over to an inn her relatives run. Once there, they meet her cousins, Ri and Ko, who look like they have already been warned about Satoshi's fruity energy. Moments later, Hotaru and Satoshi check out their rooms, and Hotaru tries to act like scenic mountain views are just another Tuesday in his life. But Satoshi clowns him for being ungrateful, saying he should just admit he is finally living outside the Matrix. As the sun dips, Hotaru decides to hit the hot spring, only to see Iru with the same plan. So they walk and talk along the way. She shares her daydreams about having siblings, and he pretends to listen while low-key trying not to sound like a creep. After changing, he slides into the bath, ready for peace at last, but of course, Satoshi is already there, waiting like some aquatic gremlin. Satoshi immediately turns up the fruity behavior, which makes Hotaru wish drowning were a safe option. He tries to tune him out, but then he hears Iru's voice entering the girls' side of the bath. That short-circuits his brain into goon mode, and he nearly passes out imagining things until dizziness actually knocks him out. leaving Satoshi to drag his half-dead body back like a firefighter. An hour later, Iru comes by to check on him, but her gentle touch turns him into a walking embarrassment, so he quickly rolls over, pretends he is fine, and begs the universe for her to leave before she notices his emergency brick. After she leaves, he overhears the others chatting about some mysterious client who once stayed at the inn before sending himself straight to the Grim Reaper. That same room became haunted and even cursed another guest with a weird illness. So Mayaka's family shut it down and started renovations to calm people's paranoia. Later that night, Hotaru gets annoyed with their endless chatter and goes to shut the window, only to spot one of Mayaka's cousins sneaking out. He ignores it for the sake of his fragile sanity, figuring ghosts are easier to deal with than family drama. The next morning, he escapes Satoshi's puddle of drool and plans a quiet day with the girls. But those hopes die immediately when Mayaka shows up pale as chalk, swearing the ghost of that client was hanging in the closed-off room all night. At breakfast, Hotaru goes for tea and notices Ri has her cup labeled, so he grabs another while listening to everyone panic over Mayaka's so-called ghost sighting. Then he sees Iru acting nervous too, and when he asks, she admits she saw the same thing. That throws gasoline on the fire and turns breakfast into yet another investigation meeting. Afterward, Hotaru pulls Iru aside to ask if the windows in that mysterious room had been open around the time of the scary story circle. She tells him they were all closed until the exact moment Mayaka freaked out, which just raises more questions. To chase answers, they go snooping around the building and ask Ko to take them inside, but she refuses, saying the room is off limits and she is suddenly way too busy with chores. On the way back, they stumble into the exercise room, where Hotaru notices Ri has also labeled her ball just like her teacup. Right after, they step outside and realize it had rained the night before, and the window opposite the ghost room is shut tight. Then Ko calls them for lunch, so they rejoin everyone and find Satoshi waiting for the gossip download. Ri comes in showing off her yukata, and while they all compliment her, Hotaru can't shake the feeling that something is off. He also senses eyes on him, which is his cue to head back to the hot spring for some thinking time. Naturally, Satoshi is already there, splashing around and asking way too many questions to make sure Hotaru won't faint again. While half listening, Hotaru catches Satoshi mentioning some local festival that happened the previous night. And suddenly everything clicks like a light bulb that has just received power. After getting out, he bumps into Iru outside, so they walk back together, and he explains that the so-called ghost isn't a ghost at all, but just a yukata somebody had secretly hung out to dry. Turns out, Ko had been jealous of Ri's yukata and wanted to wear it to the festival the night before, but when the rain ruined it, she panicked and opened the window of the only unused room to hang it up before sneaking it back in the morning. That same dangling yukata in the dark is what Mayaka and Iru saw, and their imaginations basically amplified the paranoia. Iru isn't exactly thrilled by the mystery being solved because now it means the sisters are clearly on rocky terms. But then she spots Ri carrying Ko home on her back, and that little display gives her some hope that things between them aren't completely doomed. A few days later, Hotaru and Satoshi drag themselves to school and find students already running around with festival prep, carrying boxes like unpaid interns and yelling orders like generals in a cartoon war. Watching the chaos reminds them of how far they have come since the day Hotaru first got roped into the club by Iru, and Satoshi, being the clown he always is, gets nostalgic for no reason until he remembers they have a meeting with the girls. They pick up the pace, but Mayaka gets there before them and is already ranting like a mom in the middle of a midlife crisis, waving her arms around like she is trying to summon thunder. Hotaru zones out until Iru thankfully arrives and shifts the mood, talking about a friend of hers who has worked on a movie with her class and wants them to check it out before the festival. The group then heads over to the classroom where Fayumi is waiting to greet them. Satoshi immediately tries to test his non-existent Riz by saying they have met before, but Fayumi doesn't even blink and treats him like a spam email, ignoring him completely so she can explain the movie. Hotaru, on the other hand, doesn't even want to be there and asks himself why he has to waste precious brain cells on student films, but since nobody cares about his opinion, he sits his deadbeat self down and waits for the show to start. The movie kicks off with some students going on a trip, but instead of enjoying the scenery, they find an abandoned building and decide it is the perfect Airbnb for the night because, apparently, horror tropes are fun. Two of them go off, find some regular keys, and leave the master key behind like they are setting up a future mess on purpose. Everyone splits to find rooms that don't look like crime scenes. But when they come back together, they notice one classmate is missing. They search the whole creepy building until they come across a locked door. With the master key from earlier, they get in and find their missing friend swimming in a pool of his own organs, plus an arm tossed casually by the door holding a key. One of them looks out the window for clues, spots something strange in the corner outside, and then the movie abruptly ends like someone pulls the plug. Fayumi then turns back to them and asks if they can solve the murder mystery. Hotaru is already annoyed, wondering why she can't just do her own homework instead of dumping it on random people, and more importantly, why it has to be their club out of everyone. Fayumi explains that she has heard about their whole anthology case and figures they are qualified enough to play budget detectives. She also admits the movie isn't even finished because the scriptwriter had fallen sick after writing that last scene, so she wants their help piecing it together. The rest of the group immediately looks at Hotaru like he is the hero detective they have all been waiting for and tries to convince him. But he tries to dodge the responsibility by claiming it is too much for one club to handle. Fayumi then mentions that some of her classmates are also working on theories and asks if they can at least hear them out, which makes Hotaru's escape plan crumble instantly. As always, Iru just leans in with her soft persuasion and folds his self-respect like paper until he caves. The next day, the heat gets so intense that Hotaru debates skipping school altogether, but Iru is not about to let him rot at home and shows up like his personal parole officer to drag him out. They make it to the clubroom right on time for their so-called investigation, and not long after, a shy little guy named Kurako appears to escort them to another class where the wannabe detectives are already waiting to share their theories. After introductions, the gang gets seated while Kurako leaves with two of the wannabes so they can start with Junya, the assistant director who looks like he has been held back so many times that he could probably be teaching the class instead of attending it. And it is obvious he picked up the assistant director job just to make himself feel useful after flunking life. Before anyone can ask him anything, Iru brings out a box of whiskey-flavored chocolates her family is trying to promote, and while everyone else spits it out like it is poison, she actually enjoys it and keeps snacking as if she has finally found her new favorite drug. Junya then spends several painful minutes ranting about how hard it is to be an assistant director, as if he has been carrying the whole movie on his back like some bootleg atlas, until they get sick of his voice and ask for his theory. According to him, the culprit climbs in through the window to commit the crime and escapes the same way, since the floor plans show the doors and blocked passageways aren't options. Mayaka immediately shuts down that theory by pointing out there are no footprints on the grass, but Junya's dusty brain cells are too stubborn to process it, and he walks out with the confidence of a man who thinks he just outsmarted Sherlock Holmes when in reality he barely outsmarts a pigeon. After calling Junya's theory the garbage it is, since anyone sneaking in through the window would have been spotted by students upstairs, Hotaru asks Kurako for the script before Tomohiro walks in with his detective cosplay act. He wastes no time flashing the floor plans like he is about to sell real estate, and rules out the victim being murked by a classmate with the master key, because crossing the lobby would expose them. Then, in the grand reveal of his genius, he whips out a rope and says the scriptwriter had asked for it specifically, which, according to his genius brain, means the culprit climbs in from above. Curious, Hotaru asks if there were other demands, so Tomohiro proudly reveals 2 bottles of fake blood, explaining that the writer asked for the small one, but they used the big one instead because, apparently, listening to instructions isn't part of filmmaking. He then leaves, acting like he just unlocked the secrets of the universe. But Hotaru points out that the old window makes that theory impossible, because the culprit would have been seen before they could even start climbing. A little later, Kurako returns with the script, and this time, Misaki shows up ready to deliver what she thinks is a masterpiece. Unlike the clowns before her, she is convinced none of the victims' friends could have done it. So she spins a story about a hidden character who slowly picks them off one by one until only two are left to fall in love and escape together, basically turning the script into a discount romance horror fanfic. When Hotaru asks for actual evidence, it becomes clear that Misaki has written her entire theory while running on enough nose candy to keep a horse awake. Once she leaves, Iru tries to make a point, but the whiskey chocolates she has been devouring finally overload her system, and her brain goes blank mid-sentence. The others sit down to compare all the ridiculous theories with the actual script and tell Kurako every single one of them is trash before Mayaka drags Iru home. After the usual nonsense chat with Satoshi about the questionable size of their baby carrots, the boys start heading back too, but on the way home, Hotaru runs into Fayumi, who was already waiting for him with that look that promises tea but probably comes with another headache. A little while later, they end up at a cafe, and he starts stressing about being too broke to even buy tea. But she tells him it's cool since it's not her first time hanging out with a brokey. Then she reveals the real reason she even wanted their club in the first place, saying she heard about his skill at cracking tough cases like Sherlock, and needs him to figure out what the scriptwriter is plotting because he is special. Hearing that kinda flips his whole world upside down. But he tries to stay calm and act like her words aren't strong enough to crack through his gloomy heart. Fayumi, who apparently knows exactly how to mess with his virgin simpleton brain, proceeds to tell him a little talent story that makes him follow her orders like the good simp she wants. The next day, he randomly calls Satoshi to the clubroom for a meeting, which is strange since they are already on summer break. But Satoshi instantly knows it has to be something serious if he's going to waste a holiday on it. When they get there, even Mayaka can tell he isn't himself and guesses right away that Fayumi has gotten to him, before mentioning that Iru is probably still knocked out from eating too much chocolate. They end up rewatching the movie again, looking for fresh clues, but all they get are headaches because the lack of talent behind it is that astronomically bad. That's when one of Satoshi's boys pulls up to remind him about the makeup test he has to take since he is too slow to keep up with the class. He doesn't have the guts to argue with Yamachi, so he just gives Mayaka the notes he's taken on the case and leaves it for them. With Satoshi gone, Mayaka says she isn't about to sit around soaking up Hotaru's depressing vibe and bounces, leaving him the notes to handle alone. Now, finally by himself, he manages to actually turn on his brain and dig into the movie until he finds the answers they've been hunting for. After a while, he calls up Fayumi, and she listens closely as he explains that none of the other students can do it since the old window is too tricky to sneak through and the lobby too open for the master key trick. He points out that Misaki is right about an extra character, but instead of some serial clapper like she thinks, it is the cameraman, which explains why the whole thing looks like a bootleg recording. The cameraman is treated like background help by the group, so he gets payback by snatching the master key once everyone goes inside and then offing the victim before anyone catches on. Fayumi praises his brain and even adds that it is kinda obvious since the cameraman is the only one stuck in the lobby. But Hotaru says the scriptwriter probably just wants a little mystery and doesn't care about the ending too much. She thanks him for his work, and a few days later, they all watch the movie in her class to see it play out. When it wraps, Satoshi and the girls give him props for cracking another case. But after Iru and Satoshi dip, Mayaka pulls him aside to ask about the rope Tomohiro said the scriptwriter has requested, and right away Hotaru realizes something isn't adding up. When Mayaka notices how badly Hotaru reacts to being wrong, she quickly switches topics and says she actually likes the movie's ending before heading out. A little later, as Hotaru makes his way to the locker room, Satoshi stops him just to say the same thing. This time, Hotaru tries way too hard to convince him that his theory is the real ending. But Satoshi basically tells him to face the fact that he's hella trash and walks off. Once he reaches the locker room, Iru shows up, and he instantly knows what she wants to talk about, so the two of them go for a walk. She can already tell he is beating himself up. so she takes him by the river to calm him down before gently explaining just how off the mark his theory is. She figures the scriptwriter must be aiming for a totally different kind of ending, since Fayumi's description makes her sound like a shy girl who hates violence and isn't even that into mystery movies in the first place. She then tells Hotaru to consider the fact that the writer already knew the ending she wanted, because that would explain a lot about everything. Hotaru then says that doesn't make sense because the writer fell sick and couldn't finish, but then Iru reminds him that the writer is way too shy to leave everyone hanging. The fact that her best friend even went the extra mile of gathering everyone to discuss the ending proves that the sickness isn't even that bad. However, Iru also admits that she isn't even focused on the ending, because the one he came up with sounds really good. Her main concern is figuring out why the writer couldn't use the ending she wanted. After taking a moment to think, Hotaru realizes that his first mistake was treating the movie like another random mystery instead of focusing on the emotions driving the stories. Back home a couple of hours later, he starts obsessing over what the true ending is and almost gives up before spotting an old book and glancing through it for inspiration. After several minutes of reading and brainstorming, he finally pieces everything together and realizes that he was someone else's puppet this whole time. The next day, he waits for Fayumi along her usual route and asks her to sit down with him for tea. For once, he actually saves enough to pay, and right there, he asks why she lied about him being some genius detective when all she really wanted was for someone to write her script. He has already pieced together that the original story must have been boring, especially since Tomohiro mentioned how much blood the script called for, and that Fayumi made the scriptwriter fake being sick just so she could drag the whole class and Hotaru into a fake mystery contest. It wasn't about solving anything at all, just her sneaky way of comparing everyone's theories so she could steal the best one for the movie. After laying it all out, he demands to know why she tricked him into thinking he has talent just to use him, but she hits him with the Uno reverse card, saying it is his fault for being so clueless with women and too naive to realize she's been playing him this entire time. A few days later, he gets ready for school, but his sister stops him at the door to ask about his festival plans, before handing him a broken pen as some weird form of good luck. On the way there, he runs into Satoshi, who is hyped about spending the festival with his other club, and tells him to loosen up for once so he can actually enjoy himself. Not long after, he spots Mayaka in cosplay and tries to compliment her look, but she's not used to getting compliments, so she cuts him off from using up his simp credits for the day. Once they get to school, they check out what all the other clubs have going on, but Satoshi eventually ditches them to link up with his other friends, so Hotaru goes upstairs with Mayaka and meets Iru in the clubroom. Even though she is excited for the festival, they already have a problem with the anthologies they've printed. When Satoshi finally shows up after wrecking a headpiece at the astronomy club, the girls explain that they've accidentally ordered way too many copies and now have to sell about 300 of them, even though their club is basically the least popular one in the school. They quickly come up with a plan, starting with Iru going to ask the council president for another booth, while Satoshi and Mayaka will try to promote the anthologies through their other clubs. Hotaru agrees to hold down the booth while the three of them go to the opening ceremony. After it ends, Iru goes off to find the council president, but she keeps getting sidetracked by all the booths and events. When she finally remembers what she is supposed to do, she goes to the office and knocks until a goofy Harry Potter-looking nerd named Tonabe tries to flirt with her. She almost yells at him, but it turns out he is actually the vice president. So she explains the situation, and he suggests they just share copies with other clubs since it is already too late to switch locations. Meanwhile, Mayaka goes to her own club to try and pull in customers, but they roast her for wearing a cosplay she grabbed from the Lost and Found. Back at the booth, Hotaru enjoys some rare quiet time until a guy who looks like a human hedgehog comes in to ask about the club. For some reason, he buys an anthology, then notices the pen Hotaru's sister gave him and won't shut up about how perfect it would look with his Balenciaga fit. Hotaru then tells him to just take it, and in return, the dude hands him a backstage pass to his fashion show and promises a makeover if he shows up. After he leaves, Hotaru goes right back to radiating pure depression, while Iru is still getting sidetracked by every booth she sees and starts thinking maybe she actually has amnesia. The second day of the festival kicks off with a quiz that has all the students buzzing, so Satoshi jumps in and manages to win himself a spot in the finals. Right before he goes on stage, an old friend named Tanny pulls up to chat and tries to tell him about something weird happening at the festival. But Satoshi gets called up just in time and leaves, using his spotlight to hype up the anthology series. Meanwhile, Iru comes back after making yet another round through every booth and apologizes for being as useful as the lifeguard at Bikini Bottom. But Hotaru tells her not to worry since Satoshi's little stage act is probably enough promotion already. That gives her a spark of an idea, so she goes to Masashi and asks if he can run something about the anthology in his club's newspaper. He brushes her off, saying it wouldn't matter since the bigger clubs always get more attention than a group of wannabe detectives. After excusing herself for wasting his time, she bumps into her friend Kaho, who invites her inside a tent for a fortune reading and apologizes for not having the usual tarot cards. Apparently, some festival thief has been swiping random stuff from booths and leaving cards behind in return. By then, Satoshi's quiz contest wraps up, so he tries to head out, but Tanny stops him again, this time to explain that the thief has also hit his club and left a note. Satoshi brushes it off as just some prankster and changes the subject, with Tanny challenging him to a cooking showdown scheduled for the next day. Back in the clubroom, Hotaru flips through Iru's pictures until some oddball strolls in with an AK and asks to buy an anthology. After paying, Hotaru notices the guy's sausage is hanging out from his busted zipper, so he gives him the pin from his backstage pass to fix it. In return, the weirdo hands him a water gun before walking out. Not long after, Mayaka is in her own clubroom, wrestling with low confidence while listening to one of the seniors, Ayako, go on about how manga is only as strong as its fanbase. Eventually, Mayaka gets fed up and pushes back, saying Ayako is wrong. But Ayako refuses to take criticism from an otaku too broke to even afford a proper cosplay. Mayaka fires back by promising to bring a rare manga from home to prove there are plenty of underrated series out there that are better than Ayako's favorites. Later that day, the group regroups in the clubroom to update each other, but Satoshi is way more focused on the cooking contest since he realized he needs a team of 3. With no other choice, he begs the girls to join, and luckily, they agree, so he leaves with Mayaka to plan recipes, while Iru awkwardly realizes Hotaru has been scrolling through her festival photos. That night, Mayaka tears her place apart searching for the manga she promised Ayako, only to discover that it's missing like Nemo. The next day, Mayaka apologizes to all the seniors for mouthing off, but they honestly don't care and just tell her to make new posters as punishment. Not long after, she tells Satoshi what went down, so he comes up with the idea of making her the final cook on their team before heading off to chat with Tanabe, who has also been hearing stories about the festival thief and thinks it might be worth digging into. Around the same time, Iru pulls Fayumi away from her booth to ask if she can help them sell some of the anthology copies. When Fayumi easily says yes and offers to sell it as a bundle with her movie pamphlets, Iru gets excited and thanks her, but Fayumi claims it's no big deal and stretches her hand out. Iru then gives her a handshake, but Fayumi asks for the copies she is trying to sell and tells her to always have a sample when marketing a product. This suddenly causes Iru to get intrigued, so she grabs Fayumi's hands and asks how she always gets people to say yes to her. After stepping back to avoid the same charm that stole Hotaru's heart and common sense, Fayumi explains how to use reverse psychology by making people feel some sense of accomplishment by doing what she asks. However, after a short lesson, she leans in and tells Iru to only ask guys when she is alone with them. Meanwhile, Hotaru is back in the clubroom waiting for whoever shows up next, and this time it's 2 girls obsessed with Halloween. They trade him cookies and a bag of flour in exchange for the water gun and an anthology. Around then, Tanny shows up at the contest with a pro chef by his side just to rattle Satoshi, but Satoshi is already stressing about missing a teammate and just wants the contest to start so he can go full Gordon Ramsay mode. After he handles the first round, Iru steps in and shows off her wifey skills, but when the timer runs out, Satoshi looks half dead and reminds her they are supposed to leave some ingredients for Mayaka. At the same time, Mayaka has just wrapped up the posters and runs to the contest, but she is already too late and only has a pile of vegetables to work with. When the timer starts, it looks like the whole thing is a lost cause, but then Hotaru yells to Satoshi from the clubroom and tosses him the bag of flour he got from the Halloween fanatics. With that save, Mayaka starts cooking like crazy, but she pauses again after realizing the ladle is missing and decides to wait until the hosts bring a replacement. With seconds left, she flips the switch into beast mode and somehow finishes a Michelin-worthy dish right on time, winning the whole thing for their team. After the celebration, the hosts apologize for the ladle and say they actually checked to make sure everything was intact before the contest even started. This causes Iru to get serious, so she checks it out and finds a card from the festival thief. After getting back to the clubroom and thanking Hotaru for bailing her out at the last second, Iru shows him the card and hopes that it will be enough to spark his interest. Since he has already gotten used to her face, she teams up with Satoshi and Mayaka to make it sound like solving the mystery will help boost anthology sales. But Hotaru shuts that down, saying there are way too many people at the festival to pull it off. To soften the blow, he asks about the other clubs that got hit and makes them realize the thief is working in alphabetical order. After checking the signature on the card, he explains that it is actually the initials of the thief's hit list, which means their club will probably be last. Right away, Iru runs off to get their club mentioned in the school paper, so Satoshi says he also has his own thing to handle and dips, giving Hotaru barely 5 seconds of peace before Mayaka starts unloading her family baggage on him. By then, Iru, who has already tracked down Masashi at his club, pulls him aside to work her charm, but the guy is too stoned for normal tricks and tries to walk off. When she brings up the thief, though, his brain suddenly lights up. So she spills everything she knows. He then tells her what got stolen from his club and thanks her before bouncing. On her way back, she runs into Satoshi, who immediately starts ranting about the clues he has picked up to catch the thief. Before she can even respond, he runs off to the magic club since they are next on the list. But Tanny is already there, bragging about how only he is smart enough to figure it out. Around the same time, Mayaka prepares to leave the clubroom, but Hotaru asks her for some random item as payment for the flower, so she nearly smashes his face in with a mirror and storms out. A few minutes later, Satoshi goes in to watch the Magic Club's performance, and Fuyumi also shows up, but makes sure to keep one seat between them so his rookie brain won't get any wild ideas. Right as the show starts, a candle goes missing, and Satoshi instantly realizes how dumb he is for assuming the thief will wait until the middle of the act to strike. By then, Mayaka is back at the manga club, where Ariyoshi and her squad clown her for all the fuss she made over a manga she didn't even bring, until the seniors return and tell them to stop. Not long after, Mayaka steps outside to cool off, but one of the seniors, Shauko, joins her to chat about the same manga. She then claims to know one of the authors, which gets Mayaka curious, but that is all she has to offer, so Mayaka goes back to sulking. Soon after, Satoshi drags himself back to the clubroom to admit his screw-up, and Iru also returns to say Masashi has written about their club being a likely target, which might actually help sell more anthologies. The following day, Satoshi shows up earlier than the rest, hoping to catch the festival thief off guard, but Tanny and a few other wannabe Sherlock Holmesies have the same plan in mind. Back in the clubroom, Hotaru checks their sales numbers and notices that their attempts to catch the thief are finally starting to make a difference. But since no one has shown up to yap in his face, he decides to spend some time thinking about the thief. By then, Satoshi and his fellow wannabe detectives have started getting tired of waiting for the thief to make a move, so they all start heading out. However, just as he also considers leaving, one of them gets a message and tells Satoshi that the thief attacked the light music club. At first, Satoshi refuses to believe it, but after learning that it's actually true, the painful reality of his own lack of talent starts catching up to him. Meanwhile, Hotaru's sister has just shown up in the clubroom to check on him, and after messing up his hair, She buys a copy of the anthology and trades his mirror for a copy of a manga novel. As soon as she leaves, he starts reading and gets intrigued by the name of the group that created it. So he spends a little more time reading and learns that they plan to make another release revolving around mystery and some sort of arrangement. While he continues reading, Iru goes over to Yoshino, the broadcast club president, to ask if he can give their club a shout-out. But Yoshino is already thrilled since they have been wanting to do an interview ever since people found out the classic club is on the target list. She later returns to the clubroom to tell the boys, but Hotaru barely hears her until he finishes with the manga. After he admits that it was interesting, Iru takes a closer look and suddenly gets that look he has been trying to avoid all day. He immediately tries to shut it down, but she refuses and asks to take a look at it as well. He then pulls his arm back to keep it from her, but as she leans in to grab it, he realizes that she is one wrong move away from dropping her melons on his face. So he does what any scared virgin would do and hands it over. She then flips through the pages and says she has seen similar artwork somewhere around campus. A little later, Mayaka starts working on posters in her club, but then one of the girls purposely fakes a slip and splashes paint water all over her clothes. She then walks off to change, but bumps into Iru outside, before spotting the manga she had been searching for. After Iru says she has seen something with a similar art style on the festival flyer, they go to ask Tanabe, who reveals it is the current council president's work. Once they return and fill the guys in, Hotaru starts connecting dots and figures it is time to share his theory, but knowing how the girls might react, he pulls Satoshi aside instead. Out in an open area, Hotaru lays out all the strange details they have collected and realizes the whole thing seems to have been planned since the year before. Linking directly to the manga his sister gave him, the authors had left a message teasing a new series set to launch during the festival, and all the petty thefts look like a setup for turning it into a brand new mystery book. Satoshi initially brushes it off like it isn't important and leaves to keep investigating. But deep down, he slowly starts realizing that his brain just doesn't work at the same level as Hotaru's. Meanwhile, Iru gets on the broadcast club's radio program and tries to act cool, but it all falls apart when she ends up smashing her empty head right into the sound system. Using some notes she put together earlier, she manages to keep things under control and invites the students to the clubroom as planned, where they have already set up a manuscript, hoping it will lure the festival thief. Soon enough, the place fills up, and the anthologies sell out in minutes. But after what feels like forever with no sign of the thief, the crowd begins doubting them, thinking the whole stunt is just a cheap way to promote their pointless club. Right as Hotaru goes to stretch, Satoshi's phone rings, distracting everyone, and in that moment, the manuscript suddenly goes up in flames. Once Satoshi puts the fire out, Mayaka spots a card from the thief, showing they have been tricked yet again. Not long later, Satoshi crosses paths with Tani, who then brags that he'll beat him at their next cook-off and leaves, giving Satoshi some time to talk with Mayaka alone. She tries to cheer him up about never being able to match Hotaru's detective-level smarts, but his frustration really comes from something that happened earlier. He had been spying on Hotaru and overheard him confronting Tanabe as the thief. When Tanabe demanded proof, Hotaru broke it down and pointed out all the signs that exposed him, with the biggest one being how everything traced back to the manga the council president had made the year before with a student who later transferred. Tanabe, who knew all about it, was obviously bitter that the president quit drawing, so he cooked up this entire plan, hoping to guilt-trip him into picking his art back up. Instead of exposing him, Hotaru decided to cut a deal and told Tanabe to buy 30 anthologies and advertise them on the festival site in exchange for his silence and help with the mission. Tanabe still didn't get how this was supposed to help, so Hotaru explained the manuscript setup, saying he would slip sodium between the pages so it could blow up when hit with a water gun. He also counted on a huge crowd thanks to Iru's radio broadcast, and said that his stretch would be the signal for Tanabe to call Satoshi's phone, creating the perfect distraction to trigger the blast and drop one of the anthologies with his card hidden inside. Later, at the festival's closing ceremony, the council president wraps things up, and when Satoshi and Mayaka return to the clubroom, they see only a few anthologies still left. They then buy the copies, so Iru gets hyped to finally solve the thief case with Hatero, but Satoshi tells her to hold off so they can plan a proper after-school celebration. A few days later, the crew is back in the clubroom wasting yet another full day on nonsense, when a helicopter suddenly flies past, and since Satoshi has only ever seen them on television, he rushes to the window like you when you thought Santa was real. The spinning blades make Hatero think of Ogi, that one teacher who was obsessed with helicopters, so he asks if they remember him, but Satoshi and Mayaka just wonder if he has finally fried his last 2 brain cells on the hub, not wanting to be branded the club's lunatic. Hatero explains the time Ogi literally stopped teaching mid-sentence just to gawk at a helicopter outside while forcing a fake smile that looked like he borrowed dentures from the retirement home. Mayaka instantly remembers it, but Satoshi isn't fully convinced, since he also recalls a day when a whole squad of helicopters flew by and Ogi didn't even blink. Then he adds a ridiculous story Ogi once told them about surviving 3 lightning strikes, though apparently none of them actually hit him. Hatero figures there is no way a guy like Ogi has the creativity to make up a story about being Discount Thor. So he starts piecing it together and randomly asks if the public library keeps old newspapers. When Satoshi says yes, Hatero casually asks if he wants to go with, which terrifies Satoshi, since the idea of lazy Hatero volunteering to move sounds extremely suspicious. Mayaka even asks if he needs a hospital, while Iru practically shoves her face into his, trying to figure out why he suddenly cares about life. He tells them to chill with the hospice energy and steps outside to wait for Iru, since she is the only one who actually has time for his new side quest. When she rolls up with her bike, Hatero immediately pictures both scenarios, riding with her or letting her go solo, and realizes either way he'll be bricked the whole time. So he tells her to go dig up info on Ogi first. By the time he shows up, she has found an old paper saying Ogi used to be into mountain climbing, though it isn't quite what he wants. So they go to the librarian and ask for newspapers from around the time of that helicopter sighting. After about half an hour of flipping through random ancient news nobody cares about, they finally stumble on a report about 2 climbers who get stuck on the mountain the night before. Hatero then sits down with Iru and explains that Satoshi's story about Ogi getting zapped by lightning probably comes from his mountain climbing days, and that Ogi's obsession with a helicopter that one time is because it signaled clear weather for the rescue mission to save those stranded climbers. Later, as they walk home, Iru asks why he suddenly cares about something that literally isn't his problem. She half expects him to say he is just bored, but instead, he admits he wants to fix the misconception that Ogi is just some broke old dude fanboying helicopters because he never gets to ride one. Hearing the gloomy discount Sherlock Holmes actually care about someone's dignity hits Iru right in the feels, but she stops herself from spitting out anything cringe and just tells him goodnight before heading home. The next day, Hatero walks into his test with 0 preparation and basically plays Russian roulette with every question until it's over. After that, he drags himself to the clubroom with Iru, asks about her uncle's funeral, and ends up reluctantly agreeing to visit the grave with her later. Iru keeps going on about how amazing he is at solving mysteries, but Hatero brushes it off and calls himself a useless nerd with too much anime in his system. She refuses to believe that and tries to hype him up by listing all the cases he has solved, but his self-deprecation skills are stronger than any pep talk. So he tells her to come up with a random mystery just to prove he is as worthless as he claims. Iru immediately starts scanning the room for a new mystery, but before she can cook anything up, the school's announcement system comes on, calling for a student who bought something from a store the day before. She hands Hatero the note from the announcement and tells him to solve that instead. The second he starts thinking about it, she leans in way too close, and the 2 of them almost end up sharing a clumsy first kiss. But since both of them have the dating experience of rocks, they back off awkwardly and go back to pretending it's all about solving mysteries. The shop mentioned in the announcement is a stationery place run by an elderly couple that mostly sells stuff for young students, which already makes it weird that an older student went there. Since the announcement singles out only one person, Hotaru figures the student probably did something wrong. Otherwise, it would have been handled privately instead of announced for everyone to hear. Iru wonders why he is suddenly putting effort into this if the whole point is to prove he isn't that smart. But Hotaru says it's part of his plan to show he is just a lazy bum who happened to get lucky in past cases. He keeps analyzing the situation and thinks it's odd that they made the announcement so late in the day when most students have already left. That means it had to be something urgent, possibly even serious enough to involve the police. Iru guesses maybe they are just looking for someone who matches a description. But Hotaru mentally tells her to stay in her lane as the pretty one, because that theory makes no sense. After thinking harder, he concludes that the student must have stolen something, regretted it immediately, and sent the old couple an apology letter, which they probably handed to the police, leading to the sudden announcement. The last detail to crack is figuring out what kind of mistake would make someone willingly confess afterward. After burning the last of his brain cells, Hotaru lands on the idea that the student used fake money. When he says it, Iru gets so hyped that she leans in until their lips are practically touching. But Hotaru, still holding on to his title of undefeated virgin protagonist, pulls back and returns to overthinking instead of seizing the moment. Since Iru still looks confused, Hotaru slows his explanation down to dummy level. He lays out that the student must have been handed fake money by an older person, couldn't turn it down, used it at the stationery shop, and then felt guilty enough to write an apology letter afterward. Iru accepts that theory right away and completely forgets that the entire exercise is supposed to prove that Hotaru is not actually that smart. That weekend, when Hotaru checks the morning newspaper, he sees the story laid out exactly as he predicted, showing that the student's fake bill is connected to an entire group of gangsters running a counterfeit operation. A few days later, Hotaru and Iru find themselves battling hypothermia after somehow ending up locked inside a shed. Earlier that day, Iru called to ask if he had any plans for the new year, but all he wanted was to sleep. So she suggested a shrine visit later instead. Without thinking much about it, he agreed and threw on his sharpest winter fit that night before she arrived, and he got an instant brain freeze from how stunning she looked. After their greetings, she asked for a comment on her kimono, but his mind had already frozen over. So she handed him a bottle of sake meant for the shrine caretakers and started talking about all the favors she had to pull to keep her family's ties in good shape. When they finally met the caretaker, he welcomed them, let them sit, and waited for Kaho to show up to officially accept the offering. Watching their whole rich person tradition caused Hotaru to feel like an outsider, but Iru dumbed it down in poor guy terms so he could keep up. Afterward, they went to see Mayaka, who immediately gassed up everything Iru was wearing and explained her job of guarding lost items so owners could claim them after the festival. After plenty of small talk, Iru pulled a fortune and pushed Hotaru to do the same. But while she got a blessing, his paper was filled with nothing but bad luck, causing him to regret tagging along. Soon after, Iru tried reading through his curse, but Kaho kept pacing around, so she stopped her to check what was going on. Kaho then explained that one of the volunteers had messed with the supplies, so she offered to help by fetching more from the warehouse. Hotaru decided to tag along again, forgetting how dangerous that usually turns out. The supposed detective then led her into a shed, thinking it was the warehouse, and only realized the mistake when Iru explained the difference, right before the door got locked on them. The cold quickly took a brutal turn, so Hotaru tried to yell for help, but she covered his mouth, saying it would look terrible for her family if she were found alone in a shed with a random nobody. He brushed off the blatant disrespect and came up with a bunch of escape plans, but she insisted that breaking anything would be disrespectful to the shrine. As the minutes drag on, the temperature drops even lower, and just when they think someone is close enough to help, it turns out to be only a volunteer picking up a lost item for Mayaka's station. That gives Hotaru an idea, so he breaks a piece of the shed and tosses out Iru's napkin, hoping Mayaka will notice it's a signal. Minutes later, Satoshi shows up at Mayaka's station, so she shows him the napkin, but he dismisses it completely. After waiting longer, Hotaru tries again, but this time he throws his wallet with a fortune paper tied to it. But all Satoshi notices is a coin, which he uses to get his own fortune. By then, the hypothermia stops both Hotaru and Iru from calling for help, so they quietly blame themselves for having clueless friends. But Hotaru suddenly remembers one last option and starts searching for a rope. Iru suggests using the one holding her kimono and thinks he will catch on to the hint, but he quickly realizes that the cold is affecting her ability to think straight, so he refuses. He then finds a rope tied to the shed roof and attaches Iru's purse to it before tossing it outside. Minutes later, Mayaka finally notices something strange, and Satoshi pieces together what Hotaru has been trying to tell them this entire time. By then, both are already giving up hope as the frostbite grows critical, but Satoshi shows up just in time to pull them out. A few days before Valentine's, Mayaka gets stuck in the clubroom battling cocoa powder like it's a final boss because she wants to make chocolate from scratch for Satoshi. But her insane backup plans for failure make Hotaru wonder why he keeps hanging out with these lunatics. After escaping the chocolate crime scene, he starts heading home and has just stopped by an arcade when Satoshi pops out and challenges him to a game. While playing, Hotaru notices he isn't sweating bullets or foaming at the mouth to win like he used to back in the day. But the real shocker comes when Satoshi actually takes the L and compliments him, instead of pulling a tantrum like some sore loser anime rival. When the day of love finally comes, Hotaru wakes up to a pity chocolate bar from his sister, kicks it to a corner of the room like it's bad luck, and drags himself to school. On the way, Iru pulls up to talk about Mayaka's chocolate project and casually drops that her family's way of showing love is to give people absolutely nothing. The way she says it makes him realize she is basically trying to confess, which nearly short-circuits his brain, but she quickly backtracks before his soul can leave his body. Later, Mayaka is off with the manga club, so Iru sits in the clubroom guarding the chocolate while Hotaru camps in the library waiting for the rain to chill. At one point, Iru shows up to ask if he has seen Satoshi, leaves, then comes back with him, only to announce that the chocolate has been stolen. Hotaru tries his best to keep his usual nonchalant expression, but before Iru even gets serious, he folds and lets detective mode take over. On their way upstairs, they run into a crafts club member, and after Iru explains the situation, Hotaru asks if he has seen anyone leave their floor. The guy then says he has only seen the three of them, which means the culprit is still lurking, so they storm the only other club that is still open. The second their captain comes out, Iru goes full mafia boss and threatens them with jail time. So Hotaru steps in and explains properly. The captain then asks her friends about it, but they just laugh since they are all forever alone specialists who don't even dream of getting Valentine's chocolates. Back at the clubroom, Iru remains paranoid and goes to the ladies' room, leaving Hotaru behind to piece the puzzle together. And by the time she gets back, he finally figures it out. He tries to tell her, but then Mayaka comes in, and Iru explains everything that happened to her. However, Mayaka doesn't even look that upset and brushes it off. But Iru was already planning to commit homicide and almost walks out before Hotaru stops her and says the thief is that other girl in the club they visited. He then promises to handle it alone, so she leaves to catch up with Mayaka. By sunset, Hotaru starts walking home with Satoshi and stops at a bridge to hand back his bag, saying he knows the truth all along. He asks why, and Satoshi explains he is trying to reinvent himself as a chill, nonchalant guy who can't get obsessed with anything. The problem is Mayaka, because he knows accepting her chocolate would instantly turn him into a lovesick simp. And the last thing he wants is to disappoint Andrew Tate and the Global Council of Sigmas. Earlier, Mayaka had already confessed to Iru that she knew Satoshi was the one who took the chocolate and only pretended otherwise because she realized he was just dodging her charms. Both girls are still salty about him acting like it's stolen, but at least Iru feels better knowing the truth. Before heading home, Hotaru tells Satoshi to stop lying to himself, then goes back to dig out his sister's pity bar, since that is the only gift his lonely self managed to score. Months later, Iru calls Hotaru and begs him to help out with some shrine festival she got roped into, so he breaks his loner code once again. Right after the call, he drags himself to the shrine and gets shoved into a room full of ancient fossils who are holding on to their sanity by duct tape while trying to organize everything. When they mention walking across a bridge, Hotaru remembers spotting a construction van nearby and tells them about it. At first, they brush him off because apparently, construction companies are supposed to know about the event. But when one of them comes back with the bad news, the whole senior citizens club goes into panic mode, trying to figure out a backup plan. Soon after, a messenger summons Hotaru to the room where Iru is getting dressed like shrine royalty, and he just stands there like a loyal stagehand waiting for orders while she bosses him around on behalf of the old men. After he carries out her errands, they finish the rest of the prep and then force him into an outfit that makes him look like a samurai clown. Just when he thinks life can't get any worse, Iru comes out looking like she has single-handedly invented beauty itself, and his brain short-circuits so hard he almost forgets how to breathe. His official role is now to shield her from the sun, but with her glow, she basically outshines the actual sun. So he just stands there fighting for his sanity until Mayaka and Satoshi show up and instantly roast him alive. After the procession ends, Mayaka and Satoshi keep taking turns clowning him until Satoshi eventually leaves to get a drink, and Mayaka uses the break to thank him for helping her with her Valentine's chocolate. Later that day, he finds a spot to chill on the porch and tries to enjoy some silence when Iru shows up to poke his brain about the whole construction drama, too drained to pretend he doesn't care. He spills that it is probably connected to the shady guy who dressed him up. Apparently, the dude kept talking about the procession like it was a once-in-a-lifetime cosmic event, when in reality it happens every 2 years. The only special twist this time was that they took a different route passing through some sacred tree, which made Hotaru suspect that the guy had probably called the construction company to block the bridge on purpose, just so the parade would take another route. After flexing his detective brain, he starts heading home, and of course, Iru tags along. She opens up about her future as the family's only heir, saying she has to choose between managing the farms to keep production running or handling the finances to make sure they don't crash into bankruptcy. Even though the thought of being chained to a quiet countryside full of flowers and noisy old folks doesn't exactly thrill her, she is determined to make the most of it. Listening to her spill her heart out makes Hotaru realize he is completely obsessed with her. But since his spine is made of pudding, he refuses to admit it to her face and just accepts that he is doomed to remain a spineless loner forever. Will Hotaru ever find the guts to confess his feelings for Iru? Or will she beat him to it? Comment part 2 to find out, and don't forget to turn on post notifications after subscribing to make sure you never miss any of our recaps.